Hello. Good night again. To welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight at Open Security Summit. We're going to be discussing the threat modeling manifesto, and we have almost half of the authors of it online today. So we will have a structured panel discussion at it as the first section. Feel free to write all your questions in the chat window. I will be monitoring it. And in the second half, I will encourage everyone to jump in and join in the discussion. But firstly, let's start with the introductions. Over to you, Chris.
All right. Well, thanks for introducing us here. And my name is Chris Romeo. I'm going to act as the moderator for this panel today and try to tee up some questions for people. I'm the CEO of Security Journey. And yeah, let's get to some introductions from other folks. I'm going to go according to how I see them in the Zoom window. So Jonathan, please go first.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm one of the 15. I don't know if there's a name for it yet, but it's a part of the group. I'm glad to be here. I missed the last, let's say, summit in June, so I'm glad that I could do something for this other session. So,
cool. All right, Brooke, how about you?
Brooke Schoenfield. I've been kicking around security for 20 years and high tech for almost 40. So I'm old. So you can, right there, you can stop paying attention to anything that comes out of my mouth. I've written a bunch of books about threat modeling, among other things, security architecture and secure design and secure to software development. So you can go check out that stuff. I don't get much for the books, so, steal them. I don't care, whatever. If they help, that's good. That's what they're for. And I've had leadership positions in a bunch of secure, leading software security or various aspects of it in a bunch of high-tech firms you know very well. So I've been around, kicking around for a while. So whatever I contributed to the threat modeling manifesto is kind of grounded in my experience.
Cool. Thanks, Brooke. Avi.
Hey, I'm Avi Duglin, CEO of Bounce Security, a small consulting firm. I have not been around anywhere near as long as that, but I feel pretty old as well. And to Jonathan's point, I suggest we call ourselves the Fanciful 15.
Sounds like that's been
my official role in this group is the comedy relief, and representing those that don't have as much experience as Brooke and some others. I always push more for developers to take more responsibility around threat modeling, simply because there's not enough of us experts to go around. So I'm always looking for ways to enable that.
Okay, Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Watts. I'm an academic researcher. I work at the IMEC Distrinet, which is a research group part of KU Leuven University in Belgium. I mainly do research on threat modeling, specifically privacy threat modeling, and I'm one of the creators of the Linden privacy threat modeling method.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Then we have one more person who is labeled only as surprise guest. Not quite sure who it is, but perhaps he'll introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Adam Shostak. I've been formally threat modeling for a little over 20 years. I wrote a paper. My first paper on threat modeling was in 1999. Along the way, I wrote a book that people seem to like. And these days, I run a small consulting and training firm that helps people figure out how to make this a real part of how they deliver products to their customers.
Cool. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody, for your introductions there. And so what I thought I would do is throw out some questions, but I'm going to direct the questions to one of our esteemed panel. And then after that, it'll be open for other people to provide context. And so I thought a good place to start would be, what is the Threat Modeling Manifesto? And so, Brooke, I want to come to you and let you kind of lay the foundation for what is this thing that we're even here to talk about today?
Well, first off, the threat modeling manifesto isn't going to tell you how to threat model. That's very important, and that was very intentional, because one of the things we found as we talked about this is that we all agree any structure that helps is a good structure. So we didn't want to get into that. What it's about is what's worked when we actually get in and do it. And we tried to put it in a way, I think, at least for me, that would be the most useful. We did copy, or we're a descendant, I guess, from the Agile Manifesto, but there's no direct quote from that. And we didn't confine ourselves to that form necessarily, but we did borrow from that form because where it seemed useful. But the idea here is to really set out what we have found actually works, and maybe point to some things that we think are getting in the way when we do this. I guess that I'll stop there. The idea is this is what works in threat modeling. Try for these things as opposed to avoid these other pitfalls.
Other folks, add some additional context from your perspective on what is the threat modeling manifesto.
I like to put a touch a little bit more on more the purpose of what it does. And as Brooke said, it's not going to tell you how to do it because there's no one way how to do it. And that is actually part of the problem for people who want to get started. Because a lot of people want to get started and they want to do it the right way. And what is the right way? There is no one right way. There's a lot of ways that could be right depending on context, or whatever, as Brooke said, whatever works for you. So this is kind of setting that baseline, those common universal principles and values, and kind of setting kind of a outline of what threat modeling is, and basically giving that grounding of any methodology you choose that fits this manifesto is great. And if it works for you, that's wonderful. And if it doesn't fit this, well, that's probably a bit of a problem. So this is kind of giving that kind of like an easy ramp onto finding a threat modeling that works for you. And those that already are doing threat modeling, and a lot of people are doing threat modeling and not necessarily in a great way. So this might help them get to the next level of finding what is lacking and avoiding those pitfalls, as Brooke said.
For me, the manifesto is a way to start a conversation. It's a tool to give people something to go talk to their peers, their management about, and say, hey, we could do this. And I think in being a manifesto, it's a call to go do something, right? Not just the conversation, but the conversation is a step towards where we want to be. And, I concur in everything that was just said and wanted to add the bit about it's a way to have that conversation.
So Kim, coming to this from a privacy perspective, and that's, I think, one thing I just want to highlight, you mentioned in your intro that, you've done threat modeling from the privacy perspective and have been, one of the creators of Linden, which I only even learned about a year ago. But from your perspective, though, you're coming at this from almost a different perspective than all of us. So when you think about what is the threat modeling manifesto, maybe with privacy kind of glasses on, how would you answer that question?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. But in addition, I think this manifesto can help to also spread the word in the privacy community. So in the privacy community, threat modeling is kind of unknown. So by having this manifesto, by saying we have all these people who have built it together, who describe this basis, I think this gives an even bigger leverage to bring this and to spread threat modeling in the privacy community as well. Basically, the foundation stays the same, whether it's security or privacy. There are some differences there, a different mindset even, but the foundation, the manifesto, does not care about whether it's about security or privacy or safety or whatever.
All right, Jonathan, you wanted to offer something, and then we're going to introduce another guest who's snuck in.
I am Mr. Sample for this meeting in case you haven't seen it. So the Threat Modeling Manifesto is a web page. It's on that address, www.threatmodelingmanifesto.org. I think that should be like the introduction of it, because yeah, it's just a web page. So don't think it's a thing that flies in the sky. It's basically it's just like a good read. If you print it, that's maybe like 2 pages. If you don't have like all the footnotes and all that stuff, like it should be like really concise. And so this is not a book because we have many others and the stuff like that. It's literally just like a few 1 or let's say 2 page. And I think we had a good definition of what it's trying to be and not to be. Me, it's much more like how can I use it? Like aside from reading it, what I'm getting from reading it, right? So I don't know if I'm full screen, but this might help if I'm full screen. If not, I apologize, it's too small. You have it in chat. You have the link in the chat in Zoom if you want to see it. So it's basically like I use it as a way to remember myself when I'm doing, let's say, threat modeling. Am I doing it like in a good way or a bad way? Am I misleading myself? Am I caught in a trap? And the manifesto itself, it's actually a bunch of like values. Let me just scroll down with this guy. Like it's actually values and principles. And so the manifesto itself, you have the introduction, but really the core of it is here's the values. I won't go over it because I will let the actual panel do it. But it's like when I read that, I'm like, okay, so this is the stuff that I should be thinking about the most, I guess. And this is the stuff on the left side that I should prioritize over what is on the right side. And then the principles, I really like the fact that I can just look at the title and say, okay, do I remember those patterns? Because we have like a set of, let's say, principles on top that guides. That might be a good guideline if you want to start something, if you need to be inspired, I think that the manifesto is great in order to do that, because like Brooke said, we're not giving you a methodology, but I think we're giving you inspiration on what to do. And for me, like I look at this and I'm like, okay, am I doing those patterns that are, let's say, positive for it? Is that a good thing? But most importantly for me, because I feel like this is basically describing me and it's not a good thing, that I might be doing those patterns. And so I need it in order to basically cross-check if I'm doing the stuff right, or if I'm not caught, in a loop that I just don't see like good result out of it, but I don't know why. And so maybe it's because I'm with those patterns. So that's basically like my super pragmatic view on the manifesto.
Yeah. So a couple of things, it's not methodology specific. It's not a how-to. It's based on years of experience from a whole group of people, all coming together, and we'll get more into that as well. But Izar Tarandash has joined as well, another member of the 14, 15, whatever it was. Izar, you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then I'm going to send the next question directly to you.
I wasn't joking when I said that I would parachute in. Huh? Okay. Yeah. So I've been doing this threat modeling thing for a couple of, I don't know, a bit more than 10 years or so. Have basically drunk from the source that's out there, and collaborating and learning from most of the heavy hitters that we had at the Threat Modeling Manifesto team. And that's it, quick and dirty.
All right, so I'll send the next question to you. Okay. And that question is, why a threat modeling manifesto? And then why now?
Okay, so disclaimer, that's my answer. I'm not speaking for the group. I think that there's a lot of different opinions out there. But the important thing is that those opinions apparently converged into an agreement that now was the time. And personally, I've seen this coming up for the past, I don't know, 2 years or so. I think I've been talking about, hey, we need something like a manifesto with Matthew and with Brooke for a couple of years now. And it always stayed in the back of my head and in the back of our conversations. And I think that the big thing here is that lately we are seeing threat modeling getting its place in the limelight. After a lot of evangelization, let's say, from Adam and from Brooke and from Alyssa and other people, you go to a security conference nowadays and there is a space for threat modeling. There's a discussion happening about threat modeling. People want to understand what this threat modeling thing is and what they can get out of it. And I think that in the end, the convergence that we had was that everybody agreed that, listen, if you want this thing to be taken seriously, if we want it to stop being seen as a dark art, that you have to have some specific DNA and some specific education to be able to do. If we want this thing to be something that will be adopted at all levels of the organization and will return the most on the investment that's put in, we have to draw some kind of line of what is threat modeling and why is it good for you? And in that coming together, I think that the principles and the values emerged out of the discussion. And basically looking back, I think that the thing itself proves that it was time for it to appear.
Okay, others from the panel that want to share a perspective on why a threat modeling manifesto and even why now?
Can I jump in here, Chris?
Yeah, please.
One of the things I started to notice, of course, I when I was helping to put together the SANS Institute, What Works in Security Architecture Summits around 2010, 2011-ish, 2009, 2010, 2011 ish. I kept thinking we practitioners really need to get together and decide what is it we're doing. You know, what do we agree about? What do we don't agree about? This, you know, not get together and present to each other, but actually get together and talk. In the meantime, as the years kind of rolled along, Isar and Chris and Adam and I would get together at various conferences, sometimes with Jonathan. We were on a panel together, and I got to, you know, see his brilliance and contributions and whatnot. And we'd get together and we'd talk, and there was starting to be this convergence of what was important. That really started to speak to me in a way. So, you know, I can't say that I put this together. I didn't. I had an idea years ago and never did anything about it other than say we should, which is never a call to action, really. But Isar and friends were getting together and pulling this together and thinking about it, as Isar said. And so I think, why now? Because I think, A, there were enough practitioners, and B, I think there was enough convergence that we could start to distill what we were talking about. I think that's an important piece of this, is that there was some convergence going on. And you know, hopefully the manifesto actually represents that convergence.
So when we think about the backgrounds of the people that wrote this, and very quickly, I want to transition into getting very practical here about what people can do with this as practitioners. But one of the things that struck me about this group is the diversity of background and diversity of perspective. And so, Adam, is that something, can you just talk a little bit about kind of the, not so much about who exactly wrote it, like a list, but more of like, what were some of the backgrounds that came together and some of the cool things we saw in the group by bringing these really diverse group of people together?
So I think, and you know, we've seen in the intros that we have academics, we have developers, we have security people, we have different tenures, we have very different companies. You know, some of us have worked at startups, some of us have worked at big companies, some of us have worked as consultants. And I think that the thing that made that cool was, and this also ties a little bit to the last question, that what made this work was these different perspectives allowed us to say, not this is the thing you have to do, right? It's not this is the way. It's this is the way that worked for me. And by bringing those different things together, I think we made something that is more accessible and is going to work as an inflection point for helping people get started.
Okay. Jonathan, when we think about who this is for, I know we have a very specific section there, but who is this manifesto written for? Is it written for security people only? Is it written for developers? Is it written for privacy people? Like, who's the target audience here for what we've done?
It's for you. So it is actually for everyone. And even if I'm pointing to Chris, I think you're a good example of, like, you know, it can be used as a base, you know, because you have the AppSec podcast, let's say, that you did like some, like an actual topic on the manifesto itself with the group and stuff. And so it can be used as a baseline, I guess, to talk about threat modeling, right? And so anybody that wants to talk about threat modeling and they don't have any references, because I don't know, they don't want to point to a methodology or to like a commercial tool or a thing like that, they can just use the manifesto as a, hey, here's a bunch of stuff that you can refer to and then build up upon that. So everybody can do it. And if you just want to read and you're not like a speaker, you don't have your own podcast yet, like you can just like read it by yourself. And so if you're doing, let's say, threat modeling, I would say you're most probably on the top of the list. If you are curious about it, you might be just a little bit below, because like the initial feedback that we got is that, yeah, because we're not perspective much for newer people, it might be an harder read or at least harder to get. And then if you are like in security, if you are a developer, if you are like in, let's say, privacy, any other ways that you could threat model, it can even encompass, it says safety. It's not, it doesn't need really to be related only to computers. We felt that like this applies to a really broad audience. And so that's why when you look at the actual answer of like who should threat model, I don't know if I can do this. Yeah, right at the bottom right there, who should threat model is like you and everyone. And so it's not a list because, I don't know, we didn't want to be like not including some people, because if you list some and you say, oh, it's for the security practitioner and then it's for developers, but then, I don't know, you have like a QA person that just wants in because they get really good insight on how you can basically test really from stuff, and they want to do threat modeling. Really, like, doing threat modeling should be open to everybody, and the manifesto was made in a way that anybody can get like, I don't know, the values and the principles out of it, and they can be inspired by it. So I would say, like, don't stop yourself. If you are merely interested by the topic of threat modeling, I think you fall under that scope. I'm not saying to shove that into the people that don't really mind about it, but if you have a little bit of interest, I think you're part of the scope of it.
Okay, anybody else on the panel want to talk about who it's for?
Well,
You know,
All
I agree completely with everything Jonathan said, and you know, it is for everybody. But I actually want to remove the who it's for, because you know, one of the things that we get from threat modeling, you know, I teach threat modeling when I work with teams, getting them to do threat modeling. I emphasize having this shared language, the shared understanding of the system. And the problem with that is that as threat modelers, we didn't have that shared language of what threat modeling is, or we kind of talked, you know, had a similar language, but we talked about different things. So, you know, who this is for is anybody that's trying to know what threat modeling is, right? Or being able to have that shared language around threat modeling.
an interesting thing that I learned along the way, running around the world teaching threat modeling and threat modeling with teams, is that there are other benefits. There are benefits for including everyone. It was interesting. Isar and I spoke at a conference last week on a panel, and Isar brought up a couple of points. The one person's drawing on the board, and someone else says, "Wait a minute, that isn't the way we implemented it," and that happens so often that I not have accounted for it for years in my threat modeling. That I've accounted for it. It's not just it's a surprise anymore. I expect it. It doesn't always happen, but it happens so often that I account for it.
You found an experience where the architects didn't argue?
No, they always argue. They don't always argue. That's unfair. Often they argue, yes, and it was implemented the way it was implemented. Sorry, and that's the way it is. And the point of that is one of the side benefits of threat modeling is everybody, when you are inclusive, everybody comes away with a much better understanding of what was intended and what was built. Because let's say your job is confined. I hope this isn't true anymore, especially with DevOps, but let's say your job is confined to running software or, and writing the code for that, because think DevOps, or just doing tests all day. I hope we're breaking out of those kinds of limitations, but be that as it may, this is not about that. Nevertheless, you will have a much better understanding of what you're doing. But another thing we noticed as we ran around the world doing it this way was that as people began to play with attacks and defenses, no matter what their job was, even if they were, driving the process or a line manager for development, or product managers, whomever, anybody in, building software, that as we play with attacks and defenses, and this is a really important point, which I've made in my last couple of books heavily, you understand why security is important. You get a feel for it. This isn't 100% of people, because there's no 100% with people, but it is so many people. It is such a majority as to make it really worthwhile to at least do something inclusive when you're doing threat modeling. If I could make one point today, be inclusive, at least to start, because the benefits are far beyond just the threat model.
All right, so I'm going to come to Izar, and then I want to hear Kim's answer on this next question as well. So we have a bunch of people on the line here that are part of the Zoom, and my guess is a lot of these people are threat modeling practitioners. These are people that already had an interest in, and they're like, oh, the threat modeling manifesto, let me go learn some more about it. So let's get really practical here for a little bit. And so Izar, I'd love to hear your take on how does a practitioner use the threat modeling manifesto inside of a threat modeling program? So let's just imagine they're at a big company, small company, whatever it is. They're responsible for software application security, and they want to do threat modeling. What's your guidance, or how would you recommend they get started here?
So to bring back to one of the things that Jonathan brought up, I think that at the end of the day, some of the most value that I see coming out of the manifesto is in the patterns and the anti-patterns. Like, that's really practical stuff that you can use to reflect around your practice of threat modeling and say, is this helping me or is this not helping me? So just to get an example, and something that I myself many times was guilty of, is the tendency to overfocus. So sometimes we go out there and we say, oh, there's this new technique, this new shiny stuff, and everybody's doing it, and all the bad boys are doing it, and I'm going to make sure that my system is completely impervious to that. Meanwhile, you're missing this whole list of other stuff here on the other side. So that's something that I've seen repeated time and time again, and to be able to call out it as an anti-pattern and tell people, hey, listen, you got the principles, you got the values, that this is the stuff that we think is important, but here you got these patterns that you should either try to do or try to avoid doing. I think is a very very valuable use out of this work.
Okay, so Kim, I'm curious from your perspective, what do you see as a way to use the manifesto to make a threat modeling program better?
So Izar kind of stole the answer I was gonna give already. But no, I completely agree there. I would suggest indeed that the patterns are, I think, the great starting point there. I was gonna give a different example, so at least I can give that one. Especially for those who are new, I think the hero threat modeler is the perfect pattern, because, well, people tend to be a bit scared off by, wow, this threat modeling thing, it's complex and it takes a lot of time and I need to get familiar with it. But basically everybody can and should do it and just get started with it. So that should kind of be the push. Yeah, and I think in addition to inspiring, what has been mentioned a couple of times, it's also something for the more experienced practitioners, that it should also be challenging them. So it should be kind of a checklist to see, like, am I doing this thing right, or are there ways in how I can improve what I have been doing?
Okay. Adam, if you're going into a new company now and you have the threat modeling manifesto in hand, and let's say they've never done threat modeling before, what are going to be some of your recommendations for how they can use the threat modeling manifesto inside that company?
So that's an interesting question. And sometimes I like to be a little bit sneaky and not even tell people we're threat modeling, but just start out with the 4 questions and get them going with, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And then iterate on that. And at some point say, there's a whole world here of ways that you can start to answer these questions more systematically, with more structure, with more assurance. And that's when the manifesto comes out, I think. It's, if they're really just getting going and they haven't done anything, the 4 questions. But if they have done something, one of the situations I often find myself in is that they made a mistake, that one of the anti-patterns has taken hold. And oftentimes it's the hero threat modeler. Not always, but being able to point to that and saying, this is not solely my opinion. This is the opinion of 15 people who came together, and we really need to look at, why do you have heroes? What do the heroes get out of it? What does the organization get out of it? And how can we transition, thanking them for the work they did as heroes? And, at one of the previous open summits, I had a chance to talk with Wardley of Wardley Maps. And he also talked about the idea of, there are pioneers, there are builders, and there are town planners. And a lot of times what's happening is an organizational shift from pioneers to town planners, and helping people see that that is a normal, expected, not easy, but a normal, expected part of the evolution. I think the manifesto can help people see that.
Brooke, I'm going to come back to you here. Let's kind of turn a little bit and start to think about, okay, somebody brand new to threat modeling. So they're really coming into this cold. Adam kind of gave us, I threw the example of him of coming into a company that might be cold, but in that point, there was still somebody that understood threat modeling. When you think about somebody who's brand new to this coming to the manifesto, what do you see as their path forward? What are some recommendations or guidance you would give them for someone brand new to this stuff?
And you've got to get, probably the who should do it is the most important thing. Start, please begin. some of the things that we say in the manifesto, I think, are aimed at people who've already started the journey, and the anti-patterns, you can try to avoid those, but those are kind of aimed a little bit at people who've gone down those various rat holes, or who've experienced that stuff. That's important to realize. If an organization and someone is completely cold, but they, first they have to ask themselves, why do I want a threat model? And the definition that we gave, I hope, helps you define, understand that. And then Adam's offered his, I've offered mine, whatever. You can find lots of material about that out there. You got to understand what you're going to do and what you hope to achieve out of it, because there's some different levels of threat modeling, and I don't want to go into that right now because it'll take us down a rat hole, I fear. But let's come back to it maybe if the attendees want to. There's some different outputs of threat modeling, and we understand our purpose, what we're doing, and at what point. But let's assume that you're building something, and let's just to make it a little tighter, and forgive me, let's assume it's software, though threat modeling for other things is perfectly reasonable. It's not confined to software by any stretch of the imagination. So let's assume we're building software, and we're at some place where we're going to start building software, and we've completely cold. The first thing you ought to do is figure out beyond, yes, I'd like to know what the security, something about the security and privacy that I'm going to need to build. Let's say, that's your purpose. And that's a very typical purpose, probably the main one, though not the only one. Very important. And so you've decided that. Now, how to go about it. The manifesto gives you, things to think about as you work on this, to maybe not just threat model once and have a point in time that won't actually help as things change. As you develop the software, maybe you'll pivot and the entire threat model changes. If you've only done it once, you're kind of borked there, and it's not going to match what you're doing. So we talk about the journey, and we talk about some of those things in the manifesto. So it can help you shape what you expect to do, and that it's something that you do as you're building this thing, this software. But somewhere in there, you're going to figure out what you're going to actually do. And the manifesto is, again, as we say, not going to tell you that. And, there are lots of other resources that can get you started. I mean, I'm gonna point to something that I didn't use for many years, but which I have found, and I think Adam was part of, at least the implementation, if not the invention of it. That something like Stride at least gets you started. That's what it was intended to do, and it does it quite well. Stride is a method that came out of Microsoft. I think you're partly responsible for it, Adam.
Yep,
But
Lauren Konfelder, Prerit Garg, not me.
Yeah, and Frank Swiderski, who wrote the book about Stride, and I had a long conversation about this many years ago. And it's a great place to start, though. It gives you something to hang on to, and that's part of the problem here. I'm not pushing Stride as opposed to anybody else's method, but you're going to have something, some way of looking at your system that gets you to thinking about, what do I need to do? What can go wrong, and what do I need to do? To quote Adam, and those 4 questions are probably the starting point, and then you're going to need something to kind of guide that. Remembering, and this is something I like to say a lot, if you're doing nothing and you figure out to do one thing that lowers your, yes, thank you very much, Jonathan, they're right there. And you come up with 1 or 2 things that make you a little stronger towards what you need, that's a big win. That's a huge win over nothing. So again, who should threat model everyone? Where do you start? Now and here, wherever you are. And I think we may try to make that point pretty carefully. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, no, you did. That was great. Thank you. Thanks, Brooke.
Chris,
So,
can I jump
yeah,
in
please,
one
Avi,
more?
jump in, please.
And I want to point out something. Brooke says, wherever you are, just get started. I always say the hardest threat model to do is the first one. So just get started, take a very small scope, take a small bite out of that threat model. And the second, it will be wrong. And that's fine. As Adam quotes George Bucks a lot, right? All models are wrong. Some are useful. So get started. And the cool thing is, the smaller that scope is, the smaller that bite is, the better you'll get return on your investment, the more chance that you'll come back for more bites, right? If you try, and I've seen this happen too many times, they do this great big threat model and everybody leaves like a Thanksgiving dinner, everybody's stuffed and they don't come back for another year. And I would much rather everybody have these small snacks 6 times a day than have this one big meal once a year.
When I train people, I focus in on the idea of going to the gym. The first time you go to the gym, it's going to hurt. You can't lift very much. But if you go back day after day, it gets easier. You can do more. And I find that metaphor even works for someone like me who obviously doesn't really ever go to the gym.
So I want to just let our audience know that we've dedicated a bunch of the time here for your questions. And so I'm just giving you kind of a warning that we're about to move to that phase in case you want to just be thinking about your question, or if you even want to type it in, I'm going to scan the chat in a second and use that as well. But I do have one other question before we go to the questions from the audience. And so I want to hear a couple people's perspective on this. And that question is, if you could choose only one value and principle from the manifesto, what would it be and why? And Jonathan, you were doing some acting here a second ago, but we haven't heard from you in a little bit. So why don't you go first? If you could only choose one value and one principle, what would be that combo and why?
It's like, which one of your children do you like the most, right? That's that type of question. Okay, on the values, I would probably go with the thing that is the more overarching, like at least that I can say that it is enabling what I kind of want to reach. So for me, I would pick the people and the collaboration because I don't know, I'm tired of basically faceless, like maybe templating systems or like anything that is not it's impersonal, right? And so for me, I value that, I think, a lot, because right now I don't know, like I don't see people that much, and I wish I had the time maybe to see them more. And so with that, and it's also on the quality of the results that I'm used to have, frankly. Like, I know this might goes against the hero anti-pattern, but you can just have my face on a screenshot in a meeting and the result will be better than if there's not my face, even if I said nothing. And so I think that just being there with the people and do stuff and actually collaborating makes it better than if you try to do it like a machine that is sausage, you know, like that tries to get you to the result, but then at the same time, like I don't know, it's kind of like it leads you to the result, but if you don't include other people, like you might miss on actually something. And so that will be the value. The next part of the actual question, I think, was it about the pattern?
Yeah. So if you have a principle as well, you wanna throw out there.
Yeah. So for the principles, I would say the perfect representation, because that's a good one for me, at least, because I don't know, I tend to think about a lot of things and I want like everything to be in my model. And I found out that it works better when I'm actually trying to avoid the perfection and I'm just trying to have a better organic view of what is happening. And so I guess it's pretty much tied with the people and the, let's say, collaboration from their values. So I'm glad that I'm still consistent on that, but it's like, even if it doesn't look like it, because you look at that and you think, oh, it's a self thing. But like, actually, like, we're talking a lot about different point of views. Like there's like varied viewpoints that is literally like, I guess like I should do like the show thing because it would be way easier for people because I was looking at it, by the way. So yeah. And so there's the varied viewpoints that might look like that, but it's just that this doesn't give me like a direct result. When I try to do not to do the perfect representation, then I have a direct result of maybe wasting less time and look at, what the other people have to chip in instead of trying to find like, what is the common ground that anybody stands in. Like, if you try to be super perfect about it, you will want like the consensus of everybody. But like, I don't think that's the best of the of the usage that you could have, right? And so, really for me, I would say that yeah, over time it might change a lot, but right now, with all I feel with the current practice, like of when I'm doing it, that's the kind of stuff that I will look at because I'm basically trying to reduce and be more efficient about the way it's done. And so you might think that, like other values might directly tell you about being more efficient, and the same goes with the principles. But for me, I found like there's some kind of, let's say, synergy between them. Then even if you do another one, that might be the one you need the most and it will help with the other. And so it's not always like a one-to-one mapping. I don't know if this is clear, but that's kind of how I see it. Like, it's like you look at what you're doing right now, and with that context, you will have a different answer to that question, at least for me.
Okay. Izar, curious as to what your thoughts are on if you could only choose one value and principle, what would it be?
So for the value, I would have to go with the last one, the continuous refinement over a single delivery, for two sort of simple reasons. First of all, continuous threat modeling is near and dear to my heart, the whole idea. And second, I think that it sort of supports the previous four. So if you are doing something continuously, then you are not just doing checkbox compliance. You are actually doing it as it goes. You are probably doing some collaboration. You're not doing that by yourself. Now that's a stretch, but in my mind, if you're going to do something continuously, you're not going to do it by yourself for yourself. It brings in itself the fact that it's a journey of understanding, and that links to another things that later. And definitely you are doing rather than talking about it. But the most important thing for me, and that brings together the continuous refinement and the journey of understanding, is that at some point we have to understand, and I like to stress this point, and I've heard Adam and Brooke talk about it too. Threat modeling is an evolutionary thing. You're not going to get it right the first time. You're not going to get it right the second time, but you're going to get better every time you do it, and your threat model is going to suck a bit less every day. Okay, the important thing is not to get the whole thing done in one fell swoop, but to improve as you go, to learn as you go, to teach people as you go. So the whole thing of continuous refinement over a single delivery, it's really important for me. On the principles, I would say that the dialogue is key to establishing the common understanding that lead to value, while documents record these understandings and enable measurement. That thing for me also embodies like the whole idea of doing this thing collaboratively, doing this thing not in a vacuum, doing this thing with a clear aim in mind. You want to understand your system, you want to improve your system, you want to measure the security of your system. So those two together for me, if I had to go and say, okay, we're not having 5 and 4, we're having 1 and 1, that's what I would stand behind and say, hey, let's go with that.
Luckily, we didn't have to limit it to 1 and 1, but that would have been, it would have taken us much longer than 20 hours to argue for only one of each, most definitely. Let's see, Kim, what, same question for you. Let's imagine we're in a world where you can only have one.
I would go for the culture of finding and fixing design issues over checkbox compliance as value. because especially in the privacy community now, but I think it's the same still for security a bit. We've got asked a lot, like, give us the quick fixes, the low-hanging fruit, and we can check it off and we're fine. And that's a great starting point, but we should really aim for that culture of finding and fixing things. And for the principles, I would go for the systematic approach pattern. So it's about achieving thoroughness and reproducibility by applying security and privacy knowledge in a structured manner. I'm an academic. I like thoroughness and reproducibility and those kind of things. I think it might have been mentioned before here already, like, especially as a starting point, you get some knowledge that you can hang on to, that will give you a first step to doing it thoroughly. But I think even experts, when they don't even have that external knowledge base, like try to look at, in the back of their head, there is still that structure of knowledge somewhere, but maybe that's on more of a meta level. So I think that systematic approach also applies for experts as well.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm gonna kind of take a scan in the chat here and load up a few. We'll definitely talk about calls to action, but we'll wait for the end. I saw a couple of interesting questions, and I'm going to throw out one just because I just saw it, and I'll look for the other ones while we're talking about it. But Dennis asked about, with on-site threat modeling having lots of advantages, remote sessions have the advantage of allowing more key people to participate. What are some best practices for remote threat modeling? And Adam, I'm going to send this one to you only because I did an interview and asked you this question, and we talked for 30 or 40 minutes about it. So what's your take on remote threat modeling? And then after Adam, anyone else, please jump in.
So remote collaboration is hard, and we're all learning how to do it. And as a consultant, I find myself collaborating with customers who have figured out a way that works for their organization. And those can be very different in terms of how do you do asynchronous versus synchronous communication? What tooling do you use? And I think the key to this, and actually to tie it back to the manifesto, is continuous refinement. It's not Adam is going to say, use this tool, or, hey, I like Miro. I just did a session with my friends at Agile Stationery where we used their Croupier tool to deal out elevation and privilege cards, and then we did that over Zoom. That worked for me, but maybe for you, Chris, or for Kim, or for Avi, it wouldn't work. And so the one essential thing is do it. Ask, did we do a good job? What worked, what didn't? And do it again, but be explicit about the fact that this is weird, this is hard. We're not working from home. We're sheltering in place during a global bleeping pandemic. We're all stressed out. People are losing loved ones. Their kids are running around. If you pretend that this is just working from home and the only thing that's changed is we point a camera at the whiteboard, you're going to fail.
Okay. Other panel members have any thoughts on remote threat modeling? Best practices?
I mean, at this point, it's okay. Back to the, let's say, collaboration thing, because you could do it like a presentation and be like, there's one person talking, I guess, like we're doing here, and then other people are basically following. But I think what you might want is interaction. And like we said, like there's a lot of good online tools that basically what I consider a good tool, because I don't want to name any, but it's basically something that will allow people to all connect to it. And I don't know, as I type, you can see what I'm typing. If I move an object around, you can see that. I don't know for threat modeling itself if I can even think of something, maybe like an online system that does graph that goes with updates and stuff like that. But you know what I mean? Like it needs to be a thing that is interactive and that moves with the people who are involved. And so that way they can either add notes, they can update a label, they can add a new component, they can, so that way you will have something concrete. Because if you just try to do something that it's, just, I don't know, you fire MS Paint, that's my favorite tools, right? You fire MS Paint and it's just on your machine, then other people won't feel as, let's say, compelled, let's say, to jump in. That said, that's strange because in real life, I tend to have just one person on the whiteboard and let the other tell them what to do. So maybe that's reproducible online as well, but I think that online can actually be better if you want to have like really concrete result that is written, because on a whiteboard you have like multiple people can join in, but it's not as efficient as a shared tool. So you can even use it as a better way of doing it. If not, I will try to do it in a way that, I don't know, you graph it in your MS Paint that you share, and then you have the other people telling you what to write on it. And so then you manage the discussion. And so you kind of need to do, like, mostly Chris right now is doing an awesome job, because you haven't seen our meetings when we were working on the threat model manifesto, but like, it wasn't that, let's say, structure, right? It's always like, oh, you have to jump in, and then you have to jump. And so if you can have somebody to have some type of moderation, if you have like kind of a large group and that can engage the people, and write the stuff, that could be another good help on that. I'm not sure if a recorded session has a value. I never try it. I'm used to do like online broadcasting a lot. And I know that for learning purpose, maybe you could have like a recorded session that you show people, and then that's how they can basically do the same on their own. And so at the same time, you kind of get the value of, oh, I just made a training, but then at the same time, I just made a real threat model. And so that could be another good usage. And so if you would have a tool that will allow you to record the output of it, that would be another requirement. So hopefully I've set in like a few ideas that are not tied to any solutions, because I know there's a ton of solutions for everything that I said. It depends on what you're using in your enterprise. Go with the stack that is like the closest to what is already used, or exactly what is already used. Like, okay, don't try to shove new tools just for that. That's what I'm saying.
Great, thank you. So I also want to recognize Robert Hurlbut joined here as well, another member of the Threat Modeling Manifesto team. So Robert, feel free to come off mute at any time and jump in here as well. So there was an interesting conversation happening in chat, and I want to try to bring some of it out into this dialogue here. And so I'm going to key in on, it wasn't the first question that Charles asked, but a little further into the thread, Charles asked a question about, I was wondering too about the what could go wrong question. Doesn't threat modeling put a restriction on the kind of things or kind of what's we're looking for? And so you'd think I would naturally go to Adam here, but I want to go to Brooke first, and then we'll let Adam come in after. So Brooke, what is threat modeling, is asking that question, what could go wrong? Is that restricting us in some way so that our folks can't be as creative as they want to be?
I don't see it that way. I mean, I'd be interested in the person who offered the question to tell me what restrictions. I find that the least restrictive question possible. I usually restrict myself when I teach, like Adam, I teach, and I usually restrict it to what can go wrong from human actors against software, because I don't want to take on, like, business continuity, and I don't want to take on natural disasters, and there are a lot of other possibilities you might threat model contextually be important. So I don't want to take those on when I teach, simply because I want to bound the problem enough to teach what I want to teach. But that, when I ask what could go wrong, it's very open-ended. It's very contextual too. That's the other thing. For instance, there aren't a lot of floods. There are some, but not very many in Silicon Valley, where I spent a great deal of my life. On the other hand, there are earthquakes. So if you want to take natural disasters, you get one particular flavor. If you're sitting in St. Louis, maybe floods are much bigger, or Louisiana, maybe floods are a much bigger problem for you. If you want to take that on, and the attackers become contextual too. and that's really important to me. I know we don't want to too much focus on that because it can stop you, but you know, attacker motivations and objectives can help. And certain kinds of software may have different sets of attackers. Sometimes you have them all, and that's the worst situation, but not always. So thinking through that at least once in a while as things change, but not every threat model, it's not necessary, you know, can help that context. So there's contextual things here that then start to shave what, you know, what can go wrong down. But I guess I don't understand how what can go wrong actually limits myself. In threat modeling, I'm looking for things that can go wrong. I mean, maybe I'm limiting myself when I think about threat modeling, but really that's kind of how I think about it. Sorry if I didn't answer your question.
My question was the other way around. I was trying to distinguish between the outcome of threat modeling and a test spec. So a tester asks the same question: what could go wrong?
Right, and
What
the
is
threat model,
distinct about what we're talking about?
yeah, and no, great, thank you, Charles. The threat model actually should influence. I'll just say, you know, on the side, if you're not allowing the threat model to get to your testing, you're missing one of the great pieces of it. And then the results of the test model come back to say, no, our threat model was wrong, it was incomplete, or it proves testing proves the threat model or disproves it, right? So there is very closely tied, that feedback loop. So a threat model should help because there's functional testing too, and you want your security stuff to work right. So if you've built security stuff out of the threat model, there's functional testing, but then there's functional testing for things that probably have maybe not so much to do with security or privacy or whatever. And so, you know, that's a piece of the puzzle. And I really want to get away from the idea that security trumps everything else. You know, security is a piece. When we build software, security is a piece. It's one of the pieces. It's an important piece, but you know, again, that's contextual. You know, the threat spec, I mean, the test spec ought to come out of the threat model, at least partially. On the other hand, it's kind of specific. And when I'm threat modeling, at first I start at this really gross level, personally. And it's something Asar said that's really important, how you get down in the weeds of the protocol. And I wrote a post about this not too long ago. You can go look up LinkedIn. It's the little stuff that's the obvious stuff that often gets you. So I want to start really gross and get all the obvious stuff first before I start getting into the weeds around some protocol that'll take attackers the next 5 years to figure out. You know, I mean, I want to start with securing my deployment chain so that everybody isn't sharing the password on their Facebook page. You know,
I want to
start there.
Brooke, I want to give Adam a chance to. I want to give Adam a chance to address this as well. And I think somebody else might have been getting ready to say something too. So feel free to, whoever else was talking, jump in after Adam.
Yeah, that was me. I thought Brooke was done. So if you have strong testers, threat modeling can look an awful lot like test design. I remember a very specific conversation with a fellow named Eric Douglas at Microsoft, who asserted that threat modeling is actually nothing but test design planning. And Eric was a very senior member of our test team in Windows. But I think that the orientation, the thinking that testers can have brings a tremendous amount. There's also the security specific or the privacy specific knowledge that we bring in, and a de-emphasis on probability, where, you know, if you're just doing test planning, you don't look for the most bizarre edge case you can imagine because it's never going to happen. In threat modeling, oftentimes you want to look at okay, let's ignore that probability. If it were to happen, what effect would it have? And do we need to worry about it? So it's a closely related discipline, I think, is my quickest answer.
Jonathan, you said you wanted to provide
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
context. Too.
So I look at the manifesto again, and like I understood that when we're saying threat modeling and when we're saying threat model, like actually threat modeling is like an action, and let's say threat model is the verb. So the way I see that, and I just reread like all the values and some of the principles to make sure that it fits. But if you say you're doing threat modeling and it's part of your tech spec, it's already part of everything. Everything that we said actually applies to it as well. So you're not really forced to have like what you would see maybe as a standalone step even. Like as long as you're doing like the useful stuff of the activity of threat modeling, I can consider you doing threat modeling, right? You know what I mean? Because it felt like, oh, there's the tech spec and there's the threat model. I agree that this is the common way of doing things because we don't want to overfill people with too much. But I don't know. I've seen architecture documents by the 100 of pages, so it's not like 5 more pages for a threat model in it that will change something. Brooke doesn't like that. I'm not saying that it's great. I'm just saying that those type of things exist. And I'm also saying that if you find a way that you can punch that stuff in the way you do a tech spec, I will say 2 thumbs up, because like you will be focusing the people on the right stuff and you will be integrated with the actual process of what you're doing. And so it's literally like, and it can still fit with all the values and all the principles that we lined up.
So another question that I pulled out of the chat here. Tate asked the question, what are our thoughts on threat modeling features as compared to systems? So Avi, I'd love to come back to you and get your perspective on that. Features versus systems.
Obviously, sometimes you need to threat model the whole system, the architecture, you might miss some stuff. But sometimes, most often, I think sometimes feature might be too big. Because very often you're not working on an entire feature all at once, right? You're working on a specific part of that. And a feature might be comprised of a whole bunch of user stories, right? As part of that. And the most often that's what developers are working on. And, I said at the beginning, I focus on what the developers are doing, right? And if they're working on a user story, they can threat model that. So going back to the original question, yes, absolutely. Threat model features. I think it's Izar's statement, threat model every feature. Is that yours, Izar? Absolutely.
Threat model every story.
Every story. There you go.
That would be a good t-shirt. Threat model every story. We should have a threat modeling swag store somewhere. Somebody on the line build that for us, please. We'll all be great customers of what you're doing. I think it's time to.
I'm sorry, Chris,
Yeah.
can I throw in just a couple sentences here?
Yeah, please. Sure.
If you haven't threat modeled the whole system, I think you have to have that. And then these smaller bits influence that. But I will note that I do not believe that threat models are additive. You can't sum them together. A feature or even a story might, it may not, but you really have to kind of look to the whole and say, did this shift my other assumptions in some way? And just glance back at the whole. This doesn't have to be a big process. It can be minutes. But there's a necessity to always be thinking holistically. And we covered that in the threat model, by the way. I mean, in the manifesto.
So Brooke, let me ask you this, right? I was following up that question. If you could choose one to either threat model the system as a whole or threat model every feature. And you can't
I'd say that no, that's a false dichotomy.
I agree.
I think you have to do as much as you can is known about the whole system, and then you do. So I'm going to tell a story, and everyone knows that it's horrible when I tell stories, but I'm going to tell a story anyway. And this came from Owen Carroll, who's a brilliant security architect as well as many other things and a dear friend. but he threw up. He used to write these great threat models that were really complete for his teams in Ireland. And he just got this idea to put it up on the wall in the stand-up. And what organically came out of that was that people would pull a story and they'd look up and say, security or not? Nah, let's go on. Security. Yeah, okay, can we do this by ourselves? Great. Do we need some help? Cool, let's call Owen or one of his other, his other folks to come in. And this was so powerful. And it drove threat modeling in completely organically, virally into the teams. It actually changed the way I think about this problem, by the way. This was back in 2012 or 2013. And so, it was one of my learning moments. But I just wanted to share that. It's not either or. You start and then.
So in the interest of productive controversy, Brooke, you and I both consult. Let's say someone doesn't have budget and insists on the either or. Which way do you go?
You got me. The thing is, when I consult, a lot of times people want me to deliver to them the big, huge, horrible 50-page threat modeling. I don't know if you do that at all, Adam, but I do, and I get paid nicely for it, so I do it. It's something I can do, and I get paid for it. It's not my favorite thing because it kind of avoids the whole problem. And then, getting a whole laundry list of stuff that I actually know they need to probably figure to deal with, wherever they start, I try to prioritize those and everything for them. But, I'm not sure that's the most productive way, but as long as they pay me for it, I do it because I got to make a living. Right. And, it tends to be the big whole system thing. It's when I design programs, and I've designed it 5 times in my career, I don't do it that way because it's not the best way. I want people to be looking at stuff as they're doing it and thinking about it. So I'm kind of caught in between. I'm sorry.
It's fair. And, I think it's an easy consulting deliverable. Give us 50 pages of thump. There's the threat model. Versus the thing that the manifesto talks about in terms of a journey over a snapshot. And yeah, I too get customers who are like, do this work for us. And I try and bring them on the journey. So I give them something useful, that learning, and then we end it with the thump. But it's hard.
Jonathan, please.
I'm Mr. No budget here. I don't know. Let's say you gave me only $20 as a budget. So I'm going to ask you just one question. Is your system on the internet? And then if you answer yes, I will say tough luck. And then that will be my threat model for $20, right? So what I just did here is that I went with what can go wrong. And I took the most likely thing that is basically putting you in trouble. So the question was is that like, do you threat model everything or some component? Well, you're losing the game already because when you're defending, you only need one hole ready to be open and then it's over, right? And so that's kind of the sad story about it. So what I think is the answer is more on the realm maybe of either risk rating, risk assessment, or just understanding what can go wrong. So like what is most likely, and then you go from there. So the main problem I have with that is that normally people that doesn't have much budget, they don't have that knowledge and they don't have the budget to buy that knowledge either. So it's either like you have to find like a guide somewhere, you have to base yourself on like a list of threats, and then you check it like that, and then you check everything, but with less stuff. And so I'm kind of basically shifting the scope of looking at smaller or wider at, just do all of this, but instead of looking for 1,200 items that you can think of, you take just 3 items and you go from that. And that's what you do with your budget. And when I say budget, I mean also time, because if you're really time constrained, that could be something. Because the main problem is that if you choose just to look at one system for 12,000 teams, another system might be your problem, right? Like that's kind of the main, and even for components of one system, if your scope is just one system, if you do that, that could be a problem. So me, I will just tackle it with another dimension, that is the what can go wrong instead of what are we working on.
And you heard it here first. Visit $20threatmodel.com. You will find a picture of Jonathan and a buy now button, and it'll just then show you the thumbs down after you click submit with your credit card information. So you can visit that. That doesn't really exist. Nobody go there, please. I don't know what you'll find. I want to make sure.
I just want to say to Brooke that we need to talk about upsell techniques for consultants sometimes. Because you could start with that architecture and then try, and then, you know, as Adam says, after that, get them on board with, you know, it's actually cheaper for you to do this yourself per feature. And it works out, you know, overall, you know, I'll do that one big one, and then you take it from here.
Do the baseline and let them evolve. Yeah.
Yep. So I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on call to action here. And so I would love to just go kind of around the virtual table here and get kind of a quick call to action from each member of the team here. So by quick, I'm saying let's keep it to about 60 seconds or so we can hear from everybody. Kim, I'm coming back to you to kick it off for us here. What is a call to action you would throw out to these folks that have joined us today to learn about the manifesto?
Okay, so for the people new to threat modeling, I think read it, get familiar with it, and I think it was one of the values, like stop talking about it, start doing it. So basically my main call to action is do it. And for the people more familiar with it, yeah, have it as a challenge to you, see whether you agree with it. And if not, would be interesting to know what it is that you don't agree with.
Okay. Izar, coming to you next for a call to action.
Wait, I had something written here. I'm looking for it to jump to someone else.
Avi, how about call to action? Or we can go to commercial break. Those are our two options.
Yeah, you know, I think Kim covered it pretty well. Just start doing. If you are not doing threat modeling yet, use this to start. If you are doing it already, take a look at this, get familiar with it, see how it compares to your current practice, see what you can improve in your practice based on this manifesto, based on these patterns of writing, and, you know, let us know what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah. All right, Izar, you got your
So
call to action loaded.
Yep. So my focus would be to ask for feedback from the community in learning what doesn't work for you, what hasn't worked in the past, and how could the manifesto be extended to help solve that.
Yeah, and how would we recommend people provide feedback? What's the best way?
Jonathan, do we have the issues staying on the?
You yell on Twitter with hashtag threat modeling manifesto or maybe hashtag threat modeling, and then we might catch you. We have spies everywhere.
We might.
But wait, don't we have the issue staying on the GitHub?
Yeah, no, but I think it's mostly on Twitter. They could use the GitHub, but we don't really advertise it as a thing.
Yeah, I don't
it was
remember if we
actually
decided
maybe
to or
part of the phase 2 if we wanted to be more interactive. That could be because that's one thing, and I guess I'm taking over. That's one thing that I haven't told the people is that like now we release something, but we're still talking, and so we might like expand what we do. If there's a lot of needs for it, like you will see that we will be making like mainly other presentation like that. So I guess my call for action will be like, go see those other presentation because you will have the varied viewpoints of every members of the thing. And you will see that it's very different. You won't get bored, especially when it's me talking, it's just funny. So, and yeah, but yeah, we don't have like an official way aside from you find Izard on, let's say, Twitter, and then you just like you tag him Izard_T, and then he will answer to you, and then we might all jump in. So good luck.
All right, Brooke, how about a call to action?
Mine have been covered. Yeah, please. We want feedback. Use it. Tell us what works. Tell us why we got something wrong.
All right. How about Adam? call to action.
There is no try. Do or do not.
That is a good way to end a threat modeling manifesto conversation right there. So, one thing that I wanted to share as a call to action too, just to let people know, it was mentioned early, but we did a 2-part episode on the Application Security Podcast that Robert Hurlbut and I are the co-hosts of, and we recorded all 20 hours of the conversations that led into the manifesto, and so Yoda was not a part of that gathering specifically. We couldn't get the rights, but so check out those 2 episodes if you want to get some more perspective of what happened in the background. That was a fun experience to be able to put that together after the fact, and it's something I know I'm going to go back and listen to in some years in the future. And so yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for threat modeling, and keep threat modeling everywhere, and give us that feedback. That's what we're really interested in. We want to know what you think of this manifesto, so we're happy to collect that anyway. So thank you very much, everybody.
Right,
Thanks,
and
everyone.
thanks all you guys for participating. I dropped a question on the channel, so please, give us some topics for what we could continue the conversation in January or February. And Adam, the reason I asked that question is because of the remote summits and the virtual summits, because the interesting thing that we're going to try to solve for the next on-site summit is how to actually maybe get the best of both worlds. Because when we're at the summit, and some of you have been to the summit, right? It's a spectacular experience, but it's never been very good for the remote participants. So I think there's an interesting challenge of how to get those 2 worlds together. And I think doing sessions like this helps to create a culture of how do you work effectively in a virtual world. So then when we kind of merge the virtual and the physical, we don't lose one of them.
Pointing a webcam at a whiteboard does not work.
Yeah.
It is
I agree.
terrible.
Nope.
I'm actually thinking that, when we are on site, everybody always complains when everybody has a laptop on, but I actually think that might actually work. I actually think that you might get a weird mix of everybody is like this, but some of them are in the same physical room, but you'll make sure that the remote participants don't have a second-class citizen experience, right? Because that's always the problem. Because the other thing is that the amount of talent that you can bring in, right, if you have also good remote access, is spectacular, right? So good challenge. So yeah, please give us topics, and thanks everybody for participating. This is, I have to say, this has been, the best session this week, right? So, and all is recorded, so we will put the video online in a couple of hours, and then let's do a couple more sessions in January.
And we will also post the conversations from the chat, because there's been really valuable conversations in there. We will post them onto our website. I will put the link under the video as well. Join us for January, guys. And we have 2 more sessions this week as well.
All right. You can stop the recording.